Hi everyone, in this video I will talk about a colorful technical product of the Star Wars universe. If you like what I do, please leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell. Also, on the link in the description you can support the channel on Patreon. This will really help the channel to develop. So, let's get started. The Confederacy's elite units like the Kurivar Fusiliers or the Gossam Commandos were good fighters, but they were too few against the backdrop of a multi-billion droid army. The bulk of special operations were performed by BX series commando droids. They will be discussed in this video. But it should be said that not only BX series droids could organize sabotage and eliminate high-ranking officials. There were other very dangerous droids in the Confederacy's arsenal, such as the Colicoid Infiltrator series droid, but they were even fewer in number than the elite living soldiers. The main battle droid of the Confederacy of Independent Systems were the B1 series droids. Generally not a bad mechanism if one thought about the value for money. But these cheap droids were only suitable for general combat or security functions. Because of their low autonomy and weak artificial intelligence, they could not perform operations far from their bases. And the first B1 models could not operate at all without a droid control station located on the ship or on the ground. In addition, their battery life was not enough for long. As you may recall, the problem with autonomy was one of the most important reasons for the Trade Federation's defeat on Naboo in Episode 1. Recognizing these shortcomings, the Trade Federation, even before the Clone Wars, made efforts to modernize the B1. The droids were given primitive artificial intelligence and increased autonomy. However, this was not enough. What was needed was a truly autonomous killer droid, effective enough in combat and yet not too expensive for mass production. After all, money was more important to the Neimoidian businessmen than anything else. The first experimental commando droids of the BX series appeared before the Clone Wars. Even then, it was clear that it would be necessary to perform delicate operations behind enemy lines, including sabotage, raids, and reconnaissance. However, full-scale serial production of the BX series droids began in the first months of the war. The BX was based on the well-developed B1 series droid. In fact, it was a very deep modernization. The commando droids were fully autonomous, had sufficiently developed artificial intelligence and a large memory block, where tactical schemes and combat programs were loaded, including the use of all types of weapons, hand-to-hand combat, gun control, and piloting equipment. Each droid had an improved guidance system, which noticeably improved accuracy compared to the B1 series. In addition, the droid could speak several languages, and its voice module allowed the machine to mimic the voice of a human. Reducing the length of the droid's head, which now fit into the clone's helmet, was not unreasonable, and the tin body itself fit nicely into standard clone armor. This feature was utilized by the commando droids during their first appearance on screen. This occurred in Episode 5 of first season of the animated series, when they were conducting an operation on Rishi Moon. Although a full-fledged spy, the commando droid did not become a spy. The machine could not copy the behavior of a living person and had a limited vocabulary. Droids did not know the specific slang of clones and generally had no sense of humor. To top it all off, the commando droids moved clumsily in clone armor. They couldn't react properly to unexpected situations outside the battlefield. They were created for something else after all. Plus, they had gotten into the habit of responding to orders with Roger, Roger.
Roger, 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 Roger.
So, it was easy to expose these droids. These were the moments it took for Captain Rex at the Rishi outpost to identify the droid in armor. However, to expose a squad of cloaked commando droids, it was necessary to get close to them. At a great distance, commandos were difficult to distinguish from ordinary clones, which was willingly used by Metal Special Forces in some operations. But let's return to the advantages of the BX series droids. They had noticeably improved servos on the arms and legs, which allowed to increase the carrying capacity of the entire chassis and make the droid extremely mobile. This allowed commandos to dodge shots and often defeat clones in hand-to-hand combat, although the clones were trained in hand-to-hand combat. Also, improved servos allowed the BX to run fast, jump high, and climb walls and rocks with confidence. For example, in one of the series, the commando droids ambushed the heroes by lurking just under the ceiling like spiders, and the presence of magnetic grippers on their arms and legs gave them the ability to attach themselves to metal surfaces, like the hull of a starship. This was very important in boarding operations and also in some situations prevented the droid from being toppled by a blast wave or Jedi telekinesis. And finally, the durability of the design. You may have noticed that B-1 droids could fail even from a collision with a wall. That could never happen to a commando droid, unless the hand or foot strike was force-enhanced, as was the case in the episode with the attempted negotiation with the Separatists. Improved payload capacity of the droid's chassis allowed engineers to equip it with full armor, which the B-1 lacked. The chest armor allowed the droid to withstand direct hits from many models of blaster rifles and carbines. However, this did not make the droid invulnerable. Several shots still put the tin can out of action, although it should be noted that the armor was not installed on all production vehicles. For some unknown reason, the droid's head remained unprotected. It could be penetrated even with an ELG-3A sports blaster pistol, as Padme Amidala clearly proved. The legs and arms were also not armored so as not to limit the machine's mobility. Another vulnerable spot of the droid was the neck. It remained just as fragile. In fact, Captain Rex often simply snapped droids' necks. The head contained a memory unit, a set of visual and audio sensors, and a vocabulator for communicating with non-droids and other droids in basic and binary languages. The droid's eyes allowed it to confidently distinguish objects even in low light conditions. It is worth saying a few words about the armament of commando droids. Their primary weapons were the standard E5 droid army blaster carbines, simple, effective, and compact weapons. Droid commando officers often had vibro swords as additional weapons. In addition to swords, droid commando officers were characterized by white markings on their heads, apparently to make them easier to destroy by enemy snipers. Unlike B-1, the commando droids used grenades frequently and were confident with anti-tank missile systems and grenade launchers. And in the Jailbreak episode, we get to see a commando droid at the levers of a blaster cannon and a squad of commandos using energy assault shields. It's odd that this useful device is so rarely seen in the Star Wars universe. During the Clone Wars, the BX series commando droids were used for a wide variety of operations, from guarding prison complexes to liquidations, covert infiltrations, and sabotage. A typical sabotage special operation was the action on Rishi. Droids descended on the moon in landing pods under cover of the meteor shower that so often occurred on Rishi Moon. Next, the squads made a quick capture of a Republic outpost of long-range locator detection. Holding this facility gave the Separatist squadron a stealthy approach to Kamino. Had it not been for the sudden arrival of Rex and Cody, the attack on Kamino would have been unexpected. The clones ended up blowing up Outpost, which drew the attention of the Republic fleet. The surprise attack failed. Soon, 2 commando droids took part in a daring attack on the Senate building on Coruscant, the purpose of which was to free Hutt Zyro. Together with the mercenaries, they easily handled the squad of Senate commandos guarding the Senate building. This was where the surprise effect worked. Apparently, the guards didn't expect an attack in the very center of the galactic capital. The droids then pulled a disguise trick, disguising themselves as Senate commandos. They were later able to escape with Cad Bane, Zero, and other mercenaries. Incidentally, this case shows how poorly the Republic counterintelligence worked on Coruscant. A year after the battle on Geonosis, a droid commando squad was used to board the flagship of Jedi Master Eth Koth near Salukami. And already on Salukami, the commando droids were able to wound Captain Rex with a sniper rifle shot. By the way, the droids acted in a classic sniper pair, a shooter with a rifle and a gunner with binoculars. Around the same time, we could see a squad of commando droids guarding a separatist prison for especially important criminals on the Lola Sayu planet. Commando droids were sometimes encountered in general military operations where they acted as select assault squads. They could be seen in this role during the skirmish on Dathomir, in which CIS droids fought against witches of Dathomir and corpses brought back to life using the Force. In the same role, they fought as part of a separatist army group on Felucia, Ryloth, and Kyros. Occasionally, commando droids were used as bodyguards for members of the Separatist Council. In particular, during the negotiations on Mandalore, a squad of commando droids guarded both the ambassadors and the ships on which they arrived. With the end of the Clone Wars, the story of the commando droids did not end. It was simply impossible to seize hundreds of billions of droids and weapons. Many military equipment of the Grand Army of the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems found their way to the black market in the early years of the Empire. The greatest demand was for small arms. such as E5 carbines and battle droids, which were often purchased by criminal groups, pirates, mercenaries, and local governments to arm their armies. Deactivated droids were found in the warehouses and bases of the Confederation of Independent Systems, on battlefields, and many other places. The government of Cato Nemodia was no exception. This BX series commando droid was one of hundreds of battle droids used to guard Palace in the city of Zara on Cato Nemodia. They could be found patrolling the palace and its surroundings even 2 decades after the Clone Wars. In the so-called new canon, commando droids were once used by Darth Vader and Dr. Aphra shortly after the Yavin events. Then Vader discovered that his teacher, Darth Sidious, was planning to replace him with the help of a large expert in cybernetics named Silo. This moment is introduced in issue 4 of the Darth Vader comic book series. In year 5 after the Battle of Yavin, Golis Aram, an architect who had built many prisons for the Empire, used several commando droids as his personal guards, though it didn't help him when the New Republic Special Forces took an interest in him. But the most interesting commando droid that survived the Clone Wars was N1ZX, or Nunzix as he was more commonly known. After watching the animated series, we're used to seeing commando droids as fearless and emotionless mechanical assassins. But this droid has been specifically reprogrammed. Nunzix had a keen sense of self-preservation. He didn't want to risk his mechanical life unnecessarily, and combined with his selfish behavior, in short, was an interesting character. Nunzix was part of the Resistance's spy network for a time. While on the planet Kashyyyk, he managed to extract information about the First Order and the whereabouts of Supreme Leader Snoke, although it later turned out to be disinformation given to the droid by Terex, an agent of the First Order's security service. In the year 34 after the Battle of Yavin, Nunzix died. Back in the Clone Wars, commando droids of the BX series confidently opposed the clones of the Great Army, and the question arises, why this model did not become the main one in the droid army of the Confederation of Independent Systems? In official sources, the only reason cited is the high cost of commando droids. The price of one droid for the CIS was 17,900 credits. For comparison, the price of one B1 droid, depending on the modification, was from 900 to 1,800 credits. Most often, the price of one B1 unit was in the neighborhood of 1,300 credits. That is, a single commando droid cost almost 14 times as much. But were 14 B1 droids more effective than one BX? It all depended on the tactical situation. On the other hand, clones were more expensive than commando droids and took a lot of time to grow. And a lot of money had to be spent to provide clones with armor, food, medicine, and other things that droids didn't need. And commando droids exceeded the combat capabilities of the average clone, which we saw dozens of times in the animated series, and which is reflected in all official sources. That is, if we go by cost-effectiveness considerations, commando droids were preferable. The high cost of clones was one of the reasons why they were abandoned in the Imperial period. Now let's take a brief look at the effectiveness of these units through numbers. After all, it is money that is the main engine of war. At the beginning of the war, the ratio of clone to droid losses in general combat was 1 to 20. This is the figure that appears in sources about the battle on Geonosis. In smaller skirmishes, such as street battles, the ratio was even more unpleasant for the Separatists' budget. Since the list of droid losses includes not only simple B1s, but also more advanced models of battle droids, it turns out that to kill one clone of the Grand Army of the Republic, the treasury of the Confederacy of Independent Systems had to be emptied by an average of 100,000 credits. That's a very average figure, although the cost of one clone was even more. The Kaminoan products were very expensive. And by the end of the first year of the war, the ratio of casualties had shifted even further out of favor of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, to 1 in 50. The average number of droids killed per clone was 50. This was due not only to the combat experience gained by the clones and the Jedi commanding them, but also to the activities of the R-Key clones who had carried out some very effective sabotage of the droid factories. If the primary infantry droid model had been the BX series commando droids, the average cost of destroying a single clone would have been much lower. The lack of large-scale production of the BX series droids could be explained in the same way as the curtailment of the CB3 droids. Only a few hundred of them were produced at a factory on the planet Metalorn. It was a very rare version of the modernized B2 droid, The C in its numeric letter index stands for cortosis. It's a known material that can withstand lightsaber blows. There were other features of this droid, but that's not the point. Palpatine realized that the Techno-Union's new development could tip the scales of war tangibly in the direction of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Darth Sidious carefully released information on the location of the droid factory and the coordinates of the research center to the Jedi. The Republic Army and Navy then arrived on Mandalore and carried out a full-scale destruction. The factory was personally destroyed by the future Darth Vader. He was everywhere in this war. CB3 production was not resumed after that. These events happened 10 months after the battle on Geonosis. So sabotage on Sidious' part could be explained by the absence of hundreds of millions of commando droids. Or one could say that commando droids require scarce materials or sophisticated machines that the Confederacy of Independent Systems only has enough to produce a small number of them. However, even without commando droids, less than half of Kaminoan clones and only 10% of commando clones survived to the end of the war and became Imperial stormtroopers. Such a short story about the BX series commando droids. If you like what I do, please leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell. Also, by the link in the description, you can support the channel on Patreon. This will really help the channel to develop. See you in the next videos!